Michael Schein is a student of the writers, researchers, and experts in multiple aspects of the process we call marketing. He's the founder and president of Microfame Media, a marketing agency that specializes in making idea-based companies famous in their fields. Published by McGraw-Hill and appearing wherever books are sold, online and brick and mortar in your own neighborhoods, if I may add, is his interesting, provocative, and eminently fascinating book, The Hype Handbook. 12 indispensable success secrets from the world's greatest propagandists, self-promoters, cult leaders, mischief makers, and boundary breakers. Some of his clients have included eBay, the Medici Group, University of Pennsylvania, University of California, Irvine, the United Methodist Publishing House, Ricoh, Citrix, and LinkedIn. His writing has appeared in highly regarded venues as Fortune, Forbes, Inc., Psychology Today, and Huffington Post. Michael Schein is a speaker for international audiences spanning from northeastern United States to the southeastern coast of China. And this morning, he's all ours. So please help me welcome all the way from New York, our speaker and my friend, Michael Schein.
Thank you, Susan. Thank you, Antonio. I don't know how I can live up to that introduction. And just to set expectation, because I know this group kind of has a lot of things to accomplish today. How long should I talk? I can talk about this for 4 hours or 20 minutes. What would be a good amount of time?
We normally go until about 8:30. And there's some opportunity for questions and answers right after that, Michael. But whatever.
No, that's great. So about 20 minutes or so. Yeah. Okay. So, I should say I'm half joking about that introduction being overblown because when I get invited to groups like this where there are so many prominent business people, lifelong business people, business coaches, there's that little kid part of me inside that really feels a little bit out of place and very honored because until relatively recently in my life, I never wanted anything to have to do with business. Not only did I think I wasn't well suited for it, it was just something that I didn't see myself as being involved in. I mean, when I was a kid, from a very early age, I wanted to be a writer, but writing novels, writing fiction and things like that. After that, and that always stuck with me to a certain extent. After that, I got really interested in music, and played in a bunch of bands. And with the naivety of youth, I thought I was going to change rock and roll, despite being a mediocre singer and guitar player. However, I graduated college and moved to New York and told my parents, as they love to relate, on our graduation brunch that I was going to go to New York and start a band, and they weren't thrilled. However, I did that, and I did a little bit better than I think a lot of people expected. We certainly didn't become rock stars. That's pretty hard to do. But we had a residency at a popular club called Arlene's Grocery. We used to sell it out all the time. We were on the cover of an old magazine called New York Press. We were on TV. And I would say that the vast majority of that success, whatever success we had very little to do with the music. I didn't really know what marketing was, except as a very broad concept at that point. But whenever we had a show or something that we wanted to get out into the world, we would say we were going to hype it up. That was just a term we used. We probably got it from hip hop, where there's the hype man. Always say we're going to hype up this show. And that's what we did. Never thought about marketing, never thought about business, but I would do things like I dress like a nun, and walk around downtown Manhattan and perform on stage. Or we would put up signs that said, Dave Matthews must die. Now, I've been informed by an attorney, this really happened when I told that story, that I shouldn't tell that story anymore because it's a little too close to a death threat. So I just want to say, Dave Matthews, I have nothing against you. I hear you're a very nice person. But that was what we did in our 20s. And we would do things like that on a regular basis. Oh, that time I got on TV, which sounds really nice. That was actually Showtime at the Apollo. And we talked our way onto that show knowing we would be booed off. And we leveraged that happened. And we leveraged that to get onto the cover of New York Press. So that was sort of our thing and my thing. And then, as these things do, not for everybody, but for most people, the band broke up and it was, I couldn't make a living at it. So I got a job, and I'm a pretty hard worker. And so one thing led to another, and something that was supposed to be temporary turned into a career. Just one of those things I slipped into. All the business coaches on there will be very embarrassed by me saying this, but that's what happened. I slipped into this job. It was in a very brass tacks industry, the BPO industry, which is a fancy way of saying the call center industry. And, I learned a lot in the first 2 years, but over time I got used to the paycheck. I got used to all of that. I feel like I'm cutting off. Can you guys hear me? Oh, man.
Michael, we can hear you.
We can hear you.
Oh, wait, it all froze for a second for me. Can you hear me now? All right, great. What was I saying? Well, yeah, I got used to the paycheck. I started to do well. But I was there 8-9 years. I had a VP position at the end, and I was absolutely miserable. Age old story. But I had wanted to write novels. I had wanted to create art. I had wanted to create. And, I was more or less helping companies pick up the phone and give subpar service to their clients. And so eventually my now 11-year-old was on the way, and I couldn't really stand the idea of going into career day and saying I was a vice president of solution development, whatever that meant. So I quit, and I became a corporate, or I should say a marketing copywriter for big corporations. And my thing was, I'm a good writer. So I know a little bit about business now. So if I write, I can write white papers, I can write web copy, and people will pay me a couple $1,000 a pop, and I'll make a 6-figure income. So that didn't work out. Turned out I had been thoroughly corporatized in that now I knew about marketing, and I knew a little about search engine optimization, and I knew about A/B testing, and I knew about, a little bit about social media marketing. So, that's what I did. I learned, I dug in, and I tried to market myself online, and I worried about the 4 Ps and all of this. And as a result, nothing happened. I got very few clients. I had a couple. It was a subsistence income. I was burning through my savings. And I was ready to get a job again. I was working like a dog and not doing well at all. And then it's funny, I walked past that club, Arlene's Grocery. I had moved back to New York. And I remembered, I was like, I used to be really good at attracting attention to myself. Like, what changed? And I had this mental shift. And it's, I need to stop listening to marketers and start looking at hype artists. Start looking at people who have this instinctive understanding of group psychology. So rock band managers, but other kinds of people as well. And so I did that. And I'll tell you the story of what I did, but it was very successful. This one kind of stunt that I pulled. And I started to build a successful copywriting business. And eventually people wanted my approach to marketing so much that it became an agency. And now I have this book, the Hype Handbook, kind of telling my secrets. So the reason I think this is so important is because, in the business world and just in the world of trying to make things happen for yourself, people are always talking about marketing, right? I need to learn content. I need to learn the internet. I need to learn search engine. And they just struggle and struggle and struggle. And they worry about tactics and they don't know where to start. But there's a certain kind of person. And on average, let's be frank, on average, with very notable exceptions, they're pretty nasty people who just have an intuitive understanding of getting large numbers of people worked up into a frenzy to do exactly what they want. And these people are often, we talked about rock band managers. They're not necessarily nasty people, but propaganda artists, dictators have done this. Cult leaders have done this. Certain kinds of scuzzy multi-level marketing people, not that all multi-level marketing people are, but some are. And those people are very good at this. And I said to myself, and I define this as hype because I want to separate it from marketing. And to me, hype is simply any set of activities that get a large number of people highly emotional so that they'll move in the direction you want them to move. And I didn't leave my call center corporate job to do bad things in the world, to make the world a worse place. So I said to myself, are these tactics inherently bad? Because a lot of people think they are. Or is that there's something about these hype artists that make them understand human nature better than the rest of us. And what I found out is that a lot of us try to see the world the way it ought to be, that humans are rational, that human beings, behave in a certain way, and you don't need to play games. But a certain subset of people understands that we view the world, our brains don't work rationally, and that we're carried away in groupthink a lot of the time. So it became my life project to essentially figure out, how can we take these amoral concepts, not immoral or moral, and repurpose them for good? Because the bad guys already have it. And it has to be people like all of you who are creating great businesses, great work, who can really learn this formula, because it is a formula for how human beings respond in groups, so we can apply them for good. So I want to spend, the remaining 10, 15 minutes I have just giving you 2 or 3 of the 12 strategies, because there really are 12. You study these people. I've studied countless propaganda artists, cult leaders, rock band managers, and you can boil down their strategies all across the map into 12 principles. And I want to talk about 2 that maybe you can take away today. So if there's any, so does that make sense? Is that useful for everyone to go down that road? Yeah. So if there's any one strategy that's the most indispensable, it's hype strategy number 1 in the book. And it's absolutely the one that you can't do without, and that everything else is built upon. It's something that I call make war, not love. So I sort of blundered into this and then did a bunch of research demonstrating how powerful it is. So remember I said I became a bit of a hype artist again after I went into the business world. What I did was I was writing a column for Inc. at the time. And does anyone here know who Gary Vaynerchuk is? Raise your hand if you know who he is. Yeah, right. So Gary Vaynerchuk at the time, this was 10 years ago, he had created Wine Library TV, but then he became this internet guru. And pardon me, allergies. He became this internet guru, and his whole thing was going up and telling a bunch of usually young kids, young people, mainly males, that they had to hustle like animals if they wanted to be successful at all. So he would say things like, at 3 a.m, get up, I sit on the toilet and I'm tweeting. Like, that's what you need to do. You need to constantly be, tweeting and Instagram, or there wasn't Instagram at the time, but just constantly be working like a dog, personally promoting your stuff. And something didn't sit right about that, because it seemed like Gary was getting richer and richer and richer, but none of these kids were, but they worshiped him, right? In the way that maybe a cult leader would be worshiped. Also, even though his Wine Library TV was a great business and really successful, I would ask around, and I'm not saying there wasn't anything in this, but no one could really tell me about the campaigns that VaynerMedia did that were really groundbreaking campaigns. They talked about how he was promoting himself and how wonderful it was. So I wrote an article for Inc. called Why Gary Vaynerchuk is Flat Out Wrong. I picked a fight with him, and I was very respectful. I didn't troll him. But I essentially said, listen, what if you're the person making the wine instead of instead of selling the wine? How do you tweet all day long? So I said, what you really need is a systematic approach to content. So I cannot emphasize to you at this point how much of a nobody I was. This was like 11 years ago. Gary that night responded to me in the form of a video publicly, calling me out by name, talking about how I didn't know what I was talking about. I thought I had ruined my career. He, all his Vayniac followers started blowing up my phone saying what an idiot I was. And it started my career. There were all these other people who didn't have a leader who felt like I did. And even though all these people now hated me, they started to coalesce around me. And that was the first day of having a successful career. So there was a anthropologist who went to an alcove in South Africa, off the coast of South Africa, and essentially found where every human being on Earth comes from this alcove. There was a massive climate change event, not man-made, we don't think, but it wiped out most of Homo sapiens, except for this one little group that went to this alcove where there was a dense bed of shellfish. And that was great because they didn't have to hunt, they didn't have to gather, they could just essentially pick this high-calorie, nutritious thing out of a bed. So what was stopping them from getting it? other humans. There were only a limited number of these shellfish, and other humans could take them instead. So we basically evolved. The ones who survived were those who had an unusual capacity to cooperate with people that they perceived to be like them. Perceived being the key word, because genetically and racially and all of this, these people were all the same. But they came up with artificial designations, we think, tribes, whatever, and worked hard together to defend their area of the shellfish. And anyone they perceived to not be like them, they kicked out, they went to war with. And we're all descended from that. So we all want to think we're good people. We are good people in a lot of ways, but we are all more attracted to greater and lesser degrees by being against things than by being for them. So does that mean you have to go around and pick fights with human beings the way I did, be a jerk like me? No, it does not. It doesn't mean that. And in fact, I would argue that you shouldn't be a troll. You shouldn't, you can do this in a very blunt way and hurt your career. But it's very important to, instead of talking, there was this whole thing about features and benefits. For a long time, people talked about the features of their products. And then eventually people said, you know what, talk about the benefits. Don't talk about the features. And that's okay. But what's better is to talk about what point of view in your corner of the universe you're against, and then back your product into it. So what do I mean by that? Ask yourself the question, what's a point of view in my corner of the world, in my industry, that is common, that is almost gospel, that I truly, deeply feel is misguided? And build your hype on that, build your marketing on that. So Basecamp, a project management software. Yeah, exactly. So you're putting your thumb up. If I said Salesforce, you wouldn't have put your thumb up. Salesforce did well based on their technology. They essentially invented cloud project management. Basecamp has people wearing t-shirts for their company. People love Basecamp in a pseudo-religious way, which is really weird for something like that. Why? Because they never went out and said, hey, we have a really simple, easy to use technology. What they said was, we are against modern corporate culture. We're against workaholism. We're against when your clients say jump how high, we're against that. We're against saying yes whenever people put more work on your plate. And they wrote a book about it called Rework. And it's a very adversarial book. And their technology just so happens to be the tool you use to execute that vision of the universe. So first thing you should do, if you learn nothing today, ask yourself what you are against in your world and position yourself as the antidote. So does that make sense? So how much time do we have left? Because I have two other hype strategies, but I can pick one. Yeah, keep going. Okay. So another hype strategy that actually everyone on this call is probably very good at, but you don't realize you're good at it and that you could probably refine, is something I call create a secret society. And Susan Ryan is the master of this, although she calls it something different. But this is different than networking. It's related, but different. So there was a gentleman that some of you may have heard of, but many of you probably haven't, named Edward Bernays. Has anyone heard of him? And if not, you shouldn't be embarrassed. But so Edward Bernays was at one time named by Time magazine as the most significant 20th century person who is unknown. I forget how they phrased it, but it was like the most behind the scenes, important 20th century person. He invented PR. I mean, he used to call it propaganda. That's a little tidbit. And then that got some bad implications after the war. So he renamed it public relations. So if you're involved in public relations, you know what your real gig is. But he's single-handedly responsible for the taboo on women smoking disappearing. He created a suffragette Torches for Liberty, where women who lit up cigarettes to show that they were independent women on behalf of Lucky Strike. He had a government overthrown basically for the United Fruit Company. And he's also the man responsible for Americans eating bacon for breakfast. Now, didn't Americans always eat bacon for breakfast? No. Before the 20s, that was not a popular breakfast food in the United States. Edward Bernays was hired by Beechnut, which was at the time one of the major pork producers in the United States, and they wanted to up bacon consumption. So Edward Bernays always spent a lot of time nurturing what I call human pressure points, valuable connections that were selected to have a very big impact in a very short period of time. And one of these was a physician who was one of the most well-connected physicians in the country. And he got this guy to commission a study or create a study saying that bacon is the perfect health food for breakfast because it replaces the energy you lose during sleep. And the doctor sent that out to 5,000 MDs, and without one advertisement, every doctor in the country was recommending bacon to their patients. Now, the lesson here is that you should fabricate studies and lie to the public in order to get your way. And I hope you'll take that to heart. No, that is not the lesson here. In fact, I do not think you should fabricate studies. I do not think you should lie. However, my whole thing is, what can we learn from these students of human mass psychology to repurpose for good? Is it just that they're liars and thieves? Then don't use it. But is there something else? What the best hype artists have always done is that they make it seem like the success of whatever they're promoting is 100% grassroots, because that's more attractive. And we see that today, the viral hit, bit by bit, people started reading my blog and it just blew up and exploded, right? But what the best hype, and that happens, but it's always by chance. And I don't like chance as a business strategy. What the best hype artists do is they give the perception that everything is grassroots, but they spend a lot of time nurturing what used to be called an old boys club. So it's not just going around and networking, although that's important. It's building a circle of people who are friends around you that have their own followings, that have their own sway, that can help you deliver the perception of a grassroots explosion. So Tucker Max was a guy who wrote this book, I Hope They Serve Beer in Hell, in the 90s. And it was a very offensive, misogynistic book, but sold millions of copies. It was about him going out drinking every night and carousing with women. And then he got married many years later, and that image didn't help him. And all his fans, wouldn't have liked him to move on to something else. So he needed to very quickly position himself as a different kind of business person. But he had spent a lot of time building deep personal relationships with some of the biggest podcasters in the country, Tim Ferriss, and bloggers, Ryan Holiday, James Altucher. So he created a new business called Book in a Box, a ghostwriting service. And he called up all his friends and he said to them, hey, can you mention my thing on your show? And they did. And in a month, they did, $1 million in revenue. So easier said than done, right? I mean, that takes years. That takes forever to nurture. Well, maybe, but there are a couple of things you can do in our modern age to accelerate this process. One is something that I call benevolent stalking. So this is how I use social media, and it's not to build a following. Find people that you really want to know and just sort of observe them like a creep, just sort of watch them, just watch what they're doing. And a lot of times they'll talk about professional matters, but once in a while they'll let something leak that's personal. That's, I don't mean personal, but a personal interest, a sports team they're into, a hobby they have, a band they're into. And if you're into the same thing, connect with them on that level. Because everyone is a human being first. These people are being hit up for business concerns all day, but if you can connect on that level, that's a start. The other thing to do is to give up something. Think about giving up something that's cheap for you to give up and very valuable to someone else. So here's an example. Create a podcast, for example, and instead of building a big following, write an email to people you want to know that says, hey, listen, I'm profiling the top XYZ in your industry. You've made the short list. I'd love to feature you. Everyone loves exposure. Everyone likes attention. And it's amazing. Even if you don't have a podcast, you can create one and people will follow this. But do this with whatever you have. If you have a column, if you have connections you can give up that are very valuable, But the idea is, I call it interpersonal arbitrage. You always want to be, leveraging your relationships in that way. And then I'm speaking a little more quickly than usual because I want to get through all this before questions. But is everyone following, or do you need me to slow down a little? Yeah. So the third tactic or strategy out of the 12 in the book and that I practice are something that I call perfect your packaging. And now packaging, we hear that word a lot in marketing, but this doesn't mean your logo and your website and all of that. That's part of it. But, a lot of times, especially in communities like this and many of the ones I'm part of, we think in terms of touting our strengths. We think, what do I have to offer and how can I, put that out there in the best light? And there's something to that. At the same time, a lot of people have the same strengths we do. I can safely say that I'm a good writer because I've received that feedback and I should play to that. But to go out and say to people, I'm a good writer, I learned the hard way that doesn't really work very well when you're trying to build a business, because there are a lot of really good writers. A way that hype artists have always gotten around this is they look at their insecurities and weaknesses, find the flip side that's a strength, and weave that through everything they do. And you have to be very consistent with this. Literal rock stars do this very well. When David Bowie was playing Ziggy Stardust, he didn't go out in sweatpants when he wasn't on stage. He was Ziggy Stardust all the time. So, Thomas Edison, we know him as this inventor of the modern world. He invented the light bulb, he invented recorded music, he invented the movie camera, and he worked around the clock making this happen. What's interesting is he invented the phonograph, that's true, but he couldn't figure out a way to commercialize it for 15 years. He did not invent the movie camera. The movie camera was invented in his lab while he was off testing failing mining equipment. And he perfected the light bulb, and he could never figure out how to light more than a 5-block radius in downtown Manhattan. That took Westinghouse and Tesla. What he did invent, though, was the idea of the modern inventor. So before him, this idea of the round-the-clock inventor did not exist. Charles Darwin was a gentleman. He used literal gentleman. He was an aristocrat, and he used to take walks all day and work about 3 hours a day on his history-changing idea. Edison, however, wasn't good with people. He was partially deaf, which made it hard for him to communicate with people. He also is just kind of a nasty guy. I mean, he was not only an introvert, but he was gruff. He didn't really enjoy socializing. And that's really hard when you're trying to raise money for inventions and build an industrial lab. That's not a great trait. So what most of us would do is try to get over that. We would go to Toastmasters and we would take classes on socializing, and we might do a Dale Carnegie thing, and we would try to come out of our shell. What Edison did, though, is he made that weakness into a strength. He turned his cantankerous, not wanting to talk to people attitude into the image of the inventor who was locked up in his lab all the time, changing the world. So he installed a punch clock in his office for him, not for his employees, and made sure that the press received records of how many hours he was working. He would have investors come by, and he had a guy on staff who said, Mr. Edison would love to be here, but he's on the verge of breakthrough. Let me walk through the program with you. Mr. Edison will say hello, but he's very, very busy working on this. He had a story leaked to the press where he was asleep at his desk at 1 o'clock in the morning, and his assistant came to him and said, Mr. Edison, you should really go home. He said, yes, I probably should. It is my wedding night after all. So, and we take this as, and people don't know if that really happened. I mean, biographers have said that was probably fabricated. So the idea is nestled in each of your weaknesses, quote unquote, those are your quirks. Those are the things that no one else has. And we're so insecure about them, we often want to bury them. I'm not saying just talk about how awful you are. I'm saying take a sheet of paper and just really get honest with yourself of all the things you're insecure with. And then on the other side of the paper, what is the strength buried in that? Andy Warhol was pathologically shy. He probably would have been considered to have social anxiety. He was balding from a very early age, and he was gay at a time where that was illegal. He turned that into the silver wig, which he never, went out of the house without, and became his trademark. His pathological shyness became, he would speak in 2-word answers that the press would just tear apart and wonder what he meant. And the thing about being gay, he created this scene around himself of trans people, of drag queens, of, all of these people that would have been considered, the dregs of the earth at other times, and made them the factory, this group of flamboyant, interesting people. He could have not done that if he had just said, well, I'm an awesome painter. I'm gonna really emphasize my painterliness. So really go through that exercise and then get ruthless about eliminating those parts of yourself in your presentation that don't line up with that image. Create a caricature version of yourself based on who you really are at your core. So what I want to say about this is, this is part of my business. This is part of what I do. However, I've been seeing so much bad behavior that's leading to so much pain in recent years by public figures, kind of working on some of this irrational human tendency that we all have. And it's dangerous stuff. We have a lot of people out there who are not well-intentioned, who understand this human nature very, very well. But there have been bright spots in the past. Martin Luther King was a fantastic hype artist. And I don't mean that metaphorically. He actively played the media. He knew how to phrase things in a way that got people engaged in this profound way. So I happen to know from Susan and from looking at your profiles and doing a little research that every single person on this call is doing good work and well-meaning work. And so it's become my moral sort of crusade to convince people that hype can be a force for good and get people to buy into that, and then to put it in the hands of more people doing great, great work and important work. I heard some talk about climate change. I heard some talk about, really improving people's self-confidence through speaking. So whether it's from me or someone else, or whether it's by reading this book, whether it's by listening to this talk, or whether it's just doing some of this exploration on your own of how humans really operate, it would make me very happy if people like this did take a deep breath and see how some of those gears work. So yeah, I'd like to open it up to questions.
Wow, I'm not sure where to begin, Michael. I took like 6 pages of notes.
Oh, great. Thank you. Thank you. Sure, Patricia.
Well, absolutely wonderful and stimulating. And as you were talking about the sort of defects in your personality, it reminded me what my brother does magnificently well. I've seen him do it in speeches and also on social media. He takes bad reviews and people who say he's a horrible person and reposts it and then answers and critiques the asinine critique very logically.
I want to chime into that. That's a great tactic. In fact, Avis did that really well with their famous "We're number 2, so we work harder" campaign, which is legendary. That's exactly what that is.
All right. Well, I never thought of the strategy behind it until I heard you. That was great. Could you give us a case history of one of your clients that they came to you and what you did for them?
Sure. So we had a client have a client called the Medici Group, which Susan mentioned. And the whole thing about it was based on this one gentleman, Franz Johansson, who had really great books. So he wrote a book called The Medici Effect. It was a fantastic book. And as a result, everyone wanted to sort of bring this gentleman, into the fold, wanted to hire him, and he started working on all of these projects for big corporations and build a large agency. At a certain point, though, he wasn't writing so much as an article. He had been so tied up in doing the work for these clients that he didn't have time to think. He didn't have time for ideas. So we said to ourselves, okay, what do we need to do to come up with a machine to generate leads for you in an environment where you can't do the very thing that got you to where you wanted to be? And we essentially built the secret society for him. So what we said to ourselves was, okay, Franz has all of these people out in the world who have used your principles. One of whom was David Copperfield, the magician. One of whom was Aslak Gudmundsdottir, who's a big fashion name, in Iceland. And we said, what if we brought these people onto the show to create content for you without them even know they were doing so? They get to share their ideas, they get to share their businesses. So what we basically did was we gave up something that was very cheap for Franz, which was a little bit of his time to talk to these extremely high profile people. They came in and were extremely grateful to Franz for being able to share their ideas. And he had this reservoir of content that he could then repurpose. So now he had this mechanism where, we were constantly creating new content that he had put other people to work for him. All of these people became their evangelists, and they already all had very big followings. And it was fantastic. I mean, that's still sort of the root of what he does. He constantly is bringing people in who used his ideas. They're extremely grateful and thankful for him giving them a platform. Then they go out and sing his praises, and he repurposes everything into articles and snippets and sound bites. So that's one of many. But yeah, I was very proud of that job because I was a fan of his books before we started, and then he had discovered us, and we were able to work with him. So
Can I say something?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, and Michael, when I was writing face to face, I don't have a lot of numbers of people, but how I was able to get the division Fireside of Simon and Schuster on board is I said, this is who I know, these are my pals, this is their numbers, and this is the support. So it really does go back to the circles of support, circles of friends, your network, whatever you call it. You could call it spaghetti. I don't care what word you give it, but it really is who we know, who know us, who like us, etc. But I will tell you, in terms of something I don't do, and everyone knows I don't cook, but I went into a shop because I brought in my then husband's sweater and said, can you fix this? It has a hole in it. And the woman said, oh, we could sell you darning needles and you could just, whatever you do with that, crochet it yourself. And I remember saying this 38 years ago. I said, you see these hands? The only thing I do with them is talk. So no one ever did that. But Fripp knows this. There is someone whose book I think and has done mega millions of sales that I have great negative feelings about because I feel she's created a Hatfields and McCoys. And Patricia and I sat with our buddy Pete, who is the influencer and how to be a thought leader, and Susan Cain's book about introverts. Everywhere.
Oh, really? You're not a fan of that?
Not at all.
No.
A big negative, because she criticized and made fun of shy people, which I found abhorrent. But more than that, she gave people the permission to hide behind. And I did write about introverts for SHRM. And what I found from some of the human resource people is that's what happened. But our friend Peter said to me, Susan, you don't want to do that. She's had mega blah, 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 blah. Well, now that I'm this age, I'm seriously thinking of taking up the mantle, because if I read one more article about introverts make better leaders, they make better this, they make better that. And my lead line to my article for SHRM was cut out. If I read an article that says introverts make better soufflés, I give up.
So we're working with a client now who created a human resources tool. They're a startup within a bigger company that on the surface has a lot in common with other tools, but the one thing it has going for it is that it really helps companies measure engagement of their employees and offer them things that help the engagement. And something I said to them was, well, if you're working at a company that doesn't give health insurance and that doesn't provide a living wage, what do people care about carrots at lunch? And they said, well, we don't want to work with companies like that. Of course, this is for later. I said, you should advertise that. So that's the fight we're going to pick. So what we're going to say is, listen,
Good.
the message is going to be a manifesto. We don't want you. If you're not paying your health insurance, if you're not paying a living wage, don't buy our product. Run away. This is for people who have already done the brass tacks, the right work. Then we can help you. So that's an example. I didn't mean to interrupt, but of picking a fight in sort of a positive way and how it can be done, I think, very morally.
When I was on KGO, I was being interviewed. It was on how to work a room. And I said, the basis of people who know how to work a room is that they like people. And I said, and if you don't like people, please don't buy my book.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. So, any other questions? Sure.
I have a question for you, Michael. So how long were you working on this book? Was it kind of an organic process, or did you just it all come out to you in a relatively short period of time?
No, it's a good question because it's a bit of a long story. I mean, at my very heart, even though I've started a business and love my business and all of that, I still think of myself as a writer. So I knew I needed a business book to help my consulting business and all of that. However, I wanted to write a good book, a book, something that maybe people wouldn't just read to learn something for how to market. So, yeah, I mean, most people on this call certainly know this, but, I wrote a proposal and it's a lengthy document. It's 60 pages long. It has to be very good. And I sent it out to a bunch of agents and, I got a really good agent, and I was like counting the advance money. I mean, Inkwell, it was a big deal. And the person gave me all these changes and these literary kind of things and blah, blah, blah. And I went along with it, and he couldn't, sell it. And then sort of stopped returning my emails. So I was kind of like, oh, that's a drag. I don't know what that's all about. So I got another agent, even better, did a book you've all heard of, and we got very close to selling the book. Everyone's like, this guy's a good writer. And the idea is good, but this, but that, couldn't sell it to my team. So I was like, what? I don't get it. And this was like over years, I would try again and this, and I was like, I don't get it. It's a good concept. I know it is. I have some confidence in this. And I was sort of like, I guess I'm wrong, maybe I'll turn it into a course. I mean, I don't know. So I eventually had dinner with this woman, Heidi Krupp, who's a big PR agent who used to hit me up to write about her. And the other reason I knew it was good is because I write all these columns. And if I write an article about something that's not hype, I'll get 1,500 views, but I'll write a hype oriented article and get like 150,000 views. So there was like demand. But anyway, I was feeling down on myself. So I had dinner with Heidi, who has a lot of authors as clients. It used to have Tony Robbins and whatever, and telling her about something else. And she said, what else are you working on? I said, yeah, I'm doing this hype thing. I'm thinking of making it a course. And she said, that absolutely should be a book. And I said, funny, you should say that, because that was the original plan. And people had a bunch of this. I could absolutely sell that. And in my mind, excuse the French, I was like, yeah, bullshit. You know what I mean? But she was like, send me your proposal. So I sent her the proposal, and, she's a pusher, and she wasn't just, a lot of these agents, really what you're doing is paying 15% for their Rolodex, but they aren't really your agent. They're just sending it out. Heidi was my agent. She went out and got me a really good deal with McGraw Hill and made it happen. And the book's been successful. So yeah, it wasn't easy. I mean, it was a fight, but it turned out well.
Thank you. Any other questions for Michael?
To jump in, Michael, everything that you say tracks so well, and the stories that you shared were so fun and brought back so many memories for me.
Oh, really? Thanks.
So really appreciate
That's really kind. I appreciate it.
And by the way, FYI, you sold a book today to Mr. John Tenza here. So FYI here.
That's always good.
Well done for you. And also, while I'm at it, next week we have our new kids presentations. And we have Mr. Gary McKinsey and Mr. Brian Head will be speaking with us next week here. So that'll be exciting here. We are hoping to get Anastasia with us as well here, but we're following up with her. So join us, make sure to join us next week. All of you who are guests here are welcome to join us each week. We love to have you. So please keep coming back for more. If you want to throw your email into the chat, we'll make sure to throw you on our email list, and appreciate you guys all so very much. Michael, Mr. President, back to you.
Well, that was fantastic. Thank you, Michael, and thank you,
Thanks for
Antonio.
having me. Yeah.
Craig, can I make a comment?
Certainly.
Yeah. Thank you, Michael, for your, I'll call it insightful comments. I learned a lot from you, but I'm a little perplexed and a little overwhelmed. I am not a marketer. I don't get this stuff. Although I am a marketer. I market myself and who I am. The word hype to me is negative, and which obviously you shared. And I want to make a comment, then I have a question. And for me, it's disingenuous. It's not authentic. And I'm having trouble wrapping my head around this. I know it's all about the psychology and so forth of why we have to do that. But all I can think of is the negative crap we get with the negative news and Trump and all that's hype and so forth. And that's just a perfect example. The question I have.
Do you mind me commenting on that really quickly?
Please.
Yeah.
Because I don't understand.
Yeah. I actively chose the word knowing it was a negative. And I don't want to put myself in the same category as the fight I'm about to describe. But the word queer means weird, right? I mean, that was a word that means weirdo. And people took back that word and turned it into something powerful. And so maybe choosing the word hype in my small way was a form of hype. So hype comes from hyperbole. It means exaggeration. That being said, I've always been a fan artistically. Patricia, actually, your brother was really good at this in the early days of being the rock nerd that I am, but of musicians and bands where it wasn't just about strumming the guitar, where the part of the artistry was the hype, and it added color into it. People love mythology. People love stories. So I love David Bowie. And he created this larger than life character before he was even famous. He would show up in a limo before he had 2 dimes to rub together. He created himself as the greatest star in the world, Ziggy Stardust. And no one said, oh, he's lying to us. He's a jerk. We're being taken advantage of. It added color. It added beauty. It was actually part of the thing. So I've always been interested in that. So what I do is I set up rules. I will never, ever deceive someone in my business practices. And I will never, ever sell someone something that's not good for them. And to me, all hype means, I'm trying to redefine it, is getting people emotional, so that they take an action in your direction, and hopefully in a way that adds color. So yeah, Trump, I mean, there might be Trump fans on here, so I'm careful about what I want to say. But whatever you feel about him politically, he's a tremendous hype artist. He lies, but beyond that, he beyond the lying, even if he didn't lie, you can read books on group psychology. And even though he does it inelegantly, he's very, very good at using language, at using imagery that get people worked up into a frenzy. Now, those kinds of people, narcissists, he's a narcissist, whether you like the ends to where he goes, he's a narcissistic guy. He puts his name in giant letters on everything. But narcissists, usually they've done experiments with people who have antisocial personality disorder, narcissism, sociopathy. And when they're in interpersonally stressful situations, their blood rate, their pulse doesn't go up. So it's not so much that these strategies are negative in and of themselves. It's that those people see the world like a chessboard. The rest of us are like you. We say, yeah, I know it works, but it doesn't feel right, and I don't like it, and I don't want to use someone, and as a result, the Trumps of the world and the Juan Perones of the world and the P.T. Barnums of the world, they don't care. They just do it. So we can either live in, I say this with respect, but a fantasy that human beings are rational, that they make decisions based on, you know, the interests of society, that they see the world as it really is, or we can look in a clear-eyed way. How do people really make decisions? And then within our own moral code, we, you know, we move people on that basis, because every time you put out an advertisement, you're doing hype, or you can just not promote yourself. That's the other option, but I don't think anyone wants to do that. So Martin Luther King, there's no way he would have done passive resistance if those if those film cameras weren't there to capture it. Those people just would have gotten killed and no one would have known the difference. So
I appreciate your clarification and comments, and thank you. And so I don't need to ask my question because you answered it, but I wrote the word down, excitement, because you have to get people interested and excited about I like it, the direction you want them to go. But thank you.
It's a great question. It's a question that's hard. I hear it more than any other, not the way you phrased it, but people are uncomfortable with this. And that was part of the reason I wrote the book. So.
Thank you.